Relationships are one of the most important aspects of modeling data. That's because most real-life entities don't exist in a vacuum. That's why having an organized way of modeling those data is especially important if you want to make your application robust, easy to understand, as well as efficient. ObjectBox provides an easy interface to enable you to model relational data. To demonstrate this, we're building an event management app where we'll be keeping track of upcoming events, tasks within those events that need to be done, as well as assigning those tasks to specific owners. In ObjectBox, the object defining the relation is called a source object, and the referenced object is called the target object. For example, in our event management application, a task object has a relationship to an owner entity, where each task can be assigned to a single owner. While modeling this relationship, the task object will be a source, while the owner is the target object. Welcome to the screen share. I wanted to quickly show you the final result of what the event management app is going to look like before we got started with the code. So here's the homepage where we can take a look at the events tab, or the list of events we're going to have. We currently have just one event, but we can add one here with the event name, location, can select a date here. You can click on the event card and that'll take you to the tasks that are under that event or that are needed for that event. Here just have some sample data where you can see a task is related to one owner. So this is Lucy's task and it's assigned to Lucy, and this is Aaron's task is assigned to Aaron. And you can also come here to create a new task, book DJ, just for example. You can assign it to any owner here, or if you want, you can create a new one here. I'll just name one Edward, and you can assign it to him. So I think you can already guess where the relationships are or how we're using them already. You can already see a 2-1 relationship here between a task that's only assigned to one owner. And then if you go back to the events tab, you can also see that multiple tasks are related to one event. So this is an example of a too-many relationship, or a one-to-many relationship. So in most real-life scenarios, one person might be working on more than one task. They can be assigned to several tasks. And two people or two or more people can also work on a single task together. They might be collaborating, or the one person might review the other person's tasks. In those cases, we might want to have a situation where we can assign a task to more than one person at the same time. And for those cases, one-to-one doesn't really fit. Neither does one-to-many. We might need a situation where we have a many-to-many relationship where many tasks can be assigned to many owners. In that case, we will leave here and we will look at an extension, or I guess a version 2 of this application, where we can assign more than a single person. Here you can see another one-to-one relationship, but if you look at the second task, you can see that it's shared between Roger, Aaron, and John. So multiple owners, and Aaron, you can also see Aaron is in both tasks. One of the big changes we made here is on the owner selection. Instead of the singular toggle there, we added a new page where you can select your owners. Actually, I'm going to go back and only pick 2 this time, and you can assign the tasks to those 2. And this is basically what it's going to look like. So now we can move to the code and build this from scratch. So I just created a new Flutter project and I removed things that I didn't need. I just left the app bar with the title of event management application. We'll probably change this soon, but I think it's fine for now. But before we get started with building the app, we have to get our dependencies. For that, you go to the pubspec.yaml file. To get the most up-to-date packages for ObjectBox, the best place is the documentation itself. And for that, you go to docs.objectbox.io. Once you're here, you go to the Get Started page, and you can pick the project or the language you're using. And for us, it's going to be Flutter, which is the tab that's already selected. And then you scroll down to here. Once you're here, you can see the dependencies you need. So you can just copy these and paste them right here. You should also get the build runner and ObjectBox generator under dev dependencies, and then paste them here as well. And then after that, you just hit flutter pub get to install those packages. And I think that's done. After that, you have a few more steps to do. If you're building this app on iOS, you go to pod file, uncomment this line, and then set this to 11. If you're building this on Android, go to the build Gradle file under app, and then set the minimum SDK version to 21. And that's pretty much all you need to use ObjectBox for your development. Now that we have our dependencies ready, the next thing to do is to model our entities. For that, we can create a new file called models, and then we will import ObjectBox and then start writing our entities. In ObjectBox, when writing entities, you have to annotate it with the entity annotation, and specifically for IDs, you have to use the ID annotation as well. And then let's import the rest of the properties like text and status. And then we can also add a method that allows us to change the status when a task is finished or not. Then we'll do the same thing for owner. Again, don't forget the entity and ID annotations. And then I think we only need name for now. To create the relationship, go back to the task entity and then create an owner variable and then assign that to the owner entity through the to1 keyword. The first thing we're going to do here is run build runner build in order to generate the binding code necessary to run ObjectBox. Then you're going to go ahead and create a new ObjectBox file, import model as well as the newly generated ObjectBox file, then create an ObjectBox class with a store variable as well as two variables for the task and the owner box. Then use the ObjectBox._create method to assign the task box and owner box. Then we can check if the task box is empty. If it's not, then we can start putting some data into the database, like some owners as well as a task. And then we can use owner.target to assign the owner to a particular target and create that relation. After that, you can use put many and put in both tasks as a list in order to store them in the database. A really cool thing ObjectBox does is that when you do a put for the task here, the owners are also going to be put because they already have a relation. If the owner was already put, ObjectBox will only create the relation, but if it's new, ObjectBox will take care of that for you. This is such a time saver, and you also don't have to worry about all the objects that you created and worry about whether you've put them in or not. The next thing we have to do is make a create method to help us create an instance of ObjectBox in the app. And then we can start to make a few methods to make it easier to work with a database, like this add task method that takes a string as well as the owner to create a new task to put in the database as well as print on the console. And then we can make the add owner method that takes a string, creates a new owner entity, puts it on the database, and then returns the ID in the database. All of these are going to come really handy while we're making the app. The next thing we have to do is set up streams so that we have an easy way of accessing the updated or the latest data in the database. This stream is going to return a list of tasks from the database. We're going to name it get tasks, and it's going to use an ObjectBox query, which is pretty straightforward here. We're just going to query the task box and order it using ID. It's going to be descending. And we're going to return that, and we're going to make sure to trigger it immediately. We're going to set that to true, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're done with the setup we need in this particular file, and then we're going to use this on the main file to fully create the connection between ObjectBox and our application. And we're going to work on this more when we extend it for one-to-many and many-to-many relationships, but for now, let's go back to the main file. Here you should import the ObjectBox file that we created, and then create an ObjectBox variable, and then in the main function, and then you can use this method to make sure that ObjectBox has access to your application's directory in order to store the database. And finally, you can create an instance of ObjectBox and store it in the variable you created earlier. And now we can use ObjectBox in our app. So the next thing we're going to do is create the elements, pages, and views that we need for the application. And we're going to get started with the task card. So just one of the boxes or cards that we're going to use to describe a task. First thing we're going to do is import the material design package, as well as import our main.dart file and model file that we just created. And then we'll create the task card widget. And for now, we're just going to return a simple text. We'll call it task. And let's go to the home page, to the main.dart file, import the new card, and call it here so that we can see our changes on our demo application on our right. If you hit the hot reload button, which is R on your computer, you can see that the task button is visible. So now we can go back and add some more styling. We'll start off with the container widget and give it a height and a margin. And then let's add some box decoration so the box kind of pops out from the background. After that, we're going to create a row child class, and then we will add a circular checkbox. We're going to add a scale of 1.3. For now, we'll make the default value false. And also we're not going to add anything into the onChanged function. So we're going to work on that right after we're done styling it. For now, right now, we're just focused on the styling. Next, we're going to create a column, but we're going to wrap it with an expanded widget first, so that it fills all the available space. And inside that column, we're gonna have a text widget wrapped with a container for alignment, as well as an expanded again, so it can take all the available space for now. And then I just called it sample text for now. And the style depends on whether a task is finished or not. It's hard coded as true right now, as you can see, but we can implement the task status right now. So for that, let's just create a Boolean value under the state. Then we can go ahead and add it next to the style. And then let's go ahead and give it a value here. We actually don't need a question mark here because it can't be null. We'll set it to false for now, but again, we're going to have to change it later when we actually start importing task entities. And the next thing we're going to do is add the assign to text as well. It's going to have similar styling to the text at the top, but a little smaller, as you can see. And it would also change styling depending on whether a task status is true or false. So now we're going to create a menu button that we can click to do certain tasks like a delete. And for that, I want to create separate classes to make them extendable later. So we're going to have a menu element class with a text and a menu item one to store those menu elements as a list. For now, we just created the delete one, as you can see at the bottom. So now we can go back to the widget and create a pop-up menu button that will take a menu element, and I'll do a couple of things here. OnSelected is a method that's run when the user clicks the button, and the item builder will build the list of elements we have under the menu, but for now it's only the delete, and then we'll have an icon as a child for the pop-up menu. It's going to be just the 3 dots horizontally. And then at the bottom, we put the item builder that's going to create a list of the items. And then finally, we can go ahead and define the onSelected function, just to define what is going to happen when we hit delete on a task. For now, we're just going to print task deleted because we don't have the task entities yet, but then we're going to define calls to the database so we can delete it from the database. And you can see the menu there, and that's how we're going to click the delete button. This is what the task card is generally going to look like. We're going to come back here later to add some logic, but now let's work on having a list view of each task as we access the database. So now in the homepage, we're only spitting out one task card widget, but we're going to find a way to list all of the tasks that we have in our database. For that, let's create a new page and call it task list view. And this is going to create task cards as we need them later on. Let's first import the material design package, as well as the task card we just created, and then the main and model Dart files. We are then going to go ahead and create the task list stateful widget. So far, we've only been working with stateful widgets, but I imagine stateless widgets will also come. And we will be returning a stream builder that takes a list of tasks. The stream is going to be the one that we just created. We can find it at ObjectBox.getTasks. Then we're going to define our builder that takes in a context and snapshot, and it checks if the snapshot has any data in it and make sure it's not empty. And if it's not empty, it's going to return a list view builder. And then if it is empty, it's just going to return a text widget that tells the user what to do next, like add a task. Inside the list builder, we're going to have shrink wrap set to true. We're going to pass the item count. We're just going to quickly validate if it's greater than 0 or if there is data. And then we will pass the data that's inside the snapshot into the item builder that we will now define. So we can go up outside the widget, and then this is the place where we're going to define the item builder. It's going to return a task card, and it's also going to accept the snapshot data is a list of tasks, so it's going to accept a task list. It's going to go through the list of tasks, and for each of them, call task card and return that. We're seeing an error inside task card. There's an error inside task card because we didn't set it to accept any parameters, which we're going to do now. So you can go back to the task card file and add a new variable that we're going to accept, but also make sure to add it in the constructor. So now that we have task available, we can also fill the rest of the information, like the owners. So we can go ahead to the task state and define the owners. We can use the get all from the owner box, so we can get a list of all the owners, and we can set the current owner as well as the task status as well. And for that, we can create it under the init state function and set the current owner. We can also set the task status there. So we can remove the assignment there and add late to get rid of the error we're receiving. We can also add some more methods like the toggle checkbox method to change the checkbox within the widget. For that, we can run the set finished method on the task that we took in, and then we can save the new status. And after that, we can also do a put on the task to make the change in the database as well. As you can see, the method just changes the status as well as returns it. Now we're going to go back to the task card and see, yeah, the last thing that we're going to do is going to set state so that we change the status in the UI as well so that the user sees it right away. To make sure this works, we have to call this widget inside the onChanged method, but also set the initial value here. Instead of false, we're going to change it to task status, and then we'll put the function under onChanged to make sure it's called every time the user clicks on the checkbox. Now that we have the task as a parameter, we can also change the information here. So instead of sample text, we can actually add the text from the task, as well as instead of owner, we can actually write the name of the owner of the task or the current owner, since we're storing it inside that variable. And finally, we can also pass the task inside the onSelected method so that we'll be able to delete it later. So now we can implement that function as well. We can delete that comment and replace it with a call to the database to remove that particular task. We can keep the debug print, but we can just make it a little more specific. So instead of just task deleted, we're going to change that into task, the actual task text, and then delete it. That just helps us to see what we're doing later on the application. Now we can go ahead to the main.dart file, and we don't really need task card here anymore. We can just replace that with task list, task list view .dart and import that instead. And then we can go ahead at the bottom and replace task card with task list. And now we can reload and see if it changes. And there we go. Now we can see all the tasks in the list, and I think we can also delete them right now because that's fully implemented, and this is basically what it looks like. And now we can also add a button to add tasks. We can use a floating action button to handle adding new tasks. We will define an onPressed method that will run every time we press the button that will navigate into a new route, which we will call new tasks. That we are going to have to define that under components. But as a child to this floating action button, we will add an add icon so that it's easily knowable what this button will do. Then let's go ahead and create a task add file, and let's import our dependencies, the material design again, and also the main and model.dart files. And then we will set up an add task widget, which we can go ahead and import from the main.dart file. And then we will be able to call it from the main.dart file. Inside the add task widget, we're going to define two text editing controllers, one for the task text and another for the owner input when we add a new owner. We will also get a list of owners and store it inside the owners variable. And we'll also set the current owner and save it inside the current owner variable. And we'll just do an init method so that we will set the first owner inside the list into current owner. After that, we can start building the UI for the task add page. Let's start with a scaffold. Then we'll add an app bar and we'll have a text of add task. Then we can quickly hot reload to see if it works. It appears, and when we hit it, it takes us to a new page. Cool. We can define a key and call it unique key, which will be relevant later. And for the body, we will start with defining a column. Under the column, we will have a container and we will give it a padding that's symmetrical horizontal of 20. And then we'll have a text field and we will set the controller to input controller. We can hit hot reload to make sure everything's there and working. And yep, the text input is there. So all the text that we're writing inside is getting stored inside the input controller, which we can later use to manipulate and use in the database. We can add the padding as a second element in the column and give it the same padding as earlier. Then we will create a new row as the child to that padding widget. And then we will add a text widget and we'll call it assign owner. Then next to it, we'll have another widget, which is going to be a padding widget again. And we will set the padding to a horizontal symmetric one, and this time for 8 pixels instead of the 20 used earlier. And inside of that, we will have a drop-down menu item, which we will be able to list as well as toggle through owners from. And then we will map through the list of owners to fill in the items of that drop-down menu. The map will return a drop-down menu item that stores the ID and will be showing the name of the owner per loop inside the map. And then we should also have a method for when we change the current owner, since it's also a toggle. As you can see, that's what the second line is going to look like, and we can switch through owners using that toggle, but we have not implemented the changing method yet. Let's add some style before we do that. Just the font size, height, and what to do in case of an overflow. And let's add an underline for the toggle as well. It's just a slight accent and a little bit of height. And for the onChanged method, we will create a new function and we'll call it update owner. That will be called every time we toggle through the drop-down menu. We will define the function outside of the widget. It won't be returning anything, so we'll make the return void, and it will accept the owner ID, which will be the one we will be changing to. After we get the object we'll be changing to, we will set the current owner into that using a set state. And then we can add a quick null check to make sure that we don't pass a null. And after reload, you will be able to see that we can change the toggle just like that. After that, we can go down and create a text button. This will be to add new owners. And inside, we will have an onPressed function that will navigate us into an alert dialog to help us add a new owner. But before that, let's just go right below it and add a text of add owner and give it some styling. Just make it bold and add a constant so it doesn't give you the squiggly lines. And we can see it right now. We kind of want it to be on the end as opposed to right next to the toggle. So right before the text button, we should go ahead and add a spacer widget, which is basically a flexible widget that will take up as much space as it possibly can, similar to the margin auto in CSS. So as you can see, the add owner will now go to the very end, and the only space between that and screen is the padding that we added before. Now on the onPressed function, we can create a dialog widget, and we'll give it a context, and under the builder we're going to return an alert dialog, and for that we're going to give it a title of new owner, and we're going to give it content of a text field that will store the text we're going to be inputting, and the controller is going to be the owner input controller that we made earlier. And under that we're going to turn autofocus to true. And finally, we're going to give it some decoration as well as a hint text of enter the owner name. And the action is going to be a set of actions or moves that the users can take after interacting with the text field. And here we're going to add a text button called submit. And when we press it, it will call a create owner method that we will define right above. And then it'll navigate back to the add task that called the specific alert dialog. And one more thing I noticed is that the build context, it's not defined like that, but like this, just in case you also received an error, which I'm pretty sure you did if you followed exactly what I did. Let's go back up and create the create owner method. It also won't be returning anything, and we also don't need anything in the parameter because this function has access to the owner input controller. So we are going to create a new owner using the text inside the owner input controller. And then we are going to be putting that owner into the database using the ObjectBox.ownerBox.put method. And when we're done with that, we're also going to use setState to set the new owner as the current owner so that the add text is updated. One final thing is also that we will be updating the owners list above so that the toggle has the most updated list of owners. And we're also going to be adding that in the set state. That's pretty much all we need to add a new owner. We can quickly test it out after doing a hot reload. Let's go ahead and create a new owner. We can call him Roger. And there we go. He's already set, and he's also on the list of owners. Another thing this page is missing is a save button. And to add that, we're going to go under the column. Under the last row, we're going to add another row that's going to have two children, is a spacer to take as much space so that our save button is right under the add owner. And then we'll have an elevated button with a text of save. And also don't forget to make that text const because the linter kind of screams at you if you don't. And we'll have an onPressed method as well. It looks like the save button needs some padding, so we can wrap the row widget with a padding widget and give it a symmetrical horizontal padding of 20 pixels, I'd say. I think that's about right. Let's look at the changes we've made, and yep, I think it looks great. After that, inside the onPressed method, we will have a function call to, let's create a new function, let's call it create task, and we can define it at the top. One thing we can add is this line so we can pop this page and go back to the previous page once we're done working on this page or once we're done adding a task. So let's define the create task method. It's also not going to return anything. It also doesn't need to pass anything because we have all the information available in the widget. All we need to do is first validate that all the inputs we have are valid. And then we can call the add task method that we created inside ObjectBox to easily work with the database and add in the text inside the input controller as well as the new current owner. Depending whether it's changed or not, we have to pass it through here anyways. We can test this out by quickly hitting hot reload. And let's see. We can go back here. You can see the previous task. Let's go back and let's create a new one. We can call it, this is Roger's task, and we'll set it to Roger and let it save. You can see the task is there, but the owner is not changed. So it's not updating. For that, I think we have to make a few changes here. So the issue might be that even though we're updating the database, the UI, or specifically here, the current owner might not be updating when we go back from add task. So to change that, we could go to where we're calling add tasks. That will be inside the main function now. And right below that, we could do a set state. This set state won't necessarily need a new value that we're going to pass, but we can just make it empty just as a notice for Flutter to rebuild this particular UI. One more thing we have to do is go to task list view and under the widget, add a key of unique key. What this does is notify this widget when the parent widget updates. This widget is also going to update through a set state. This keeps all the data fresh because there's going to be a lot of data passing from the homepage to the task list. And perfect. So now we're done with the first part of the event management application, or at least the task management application. And we also managed to capture the one-to-one relationship between a task as well as the owner. What we did can be perfectly encapsulated inside the put demo data method that we made earlier. Creating the connection is just easy as creating the instances of those entities and setting the relationship using .target. Then we'd only have to put the source object and we're pretty much set. Now that we're finished exploring our one-to-one relationship, our next step is going to be looking at a one-to-many relationship, or in the context of this application, an events entity that's related to all the tasks. So tasks will no longer be standalone, but will be related to each event in a one-to-many relationship. So the first thing we're going to do is model our event entity. So for that, let's write the entity annotation and then create an event class. We need a few properties here. Let's start with an ID. Again, also annotated with an ID annotation, a name, as well as a date property. After that, we also need a location property
then we can just write our constructor. After this, we can start to make our relationship. This entity is going to be related to the task entity, and we're going to have a one-to-many relationship where an event can have many tasks. So first, we can start with the task entity and create a 2-1 relationship between the task and the event. The task being the source object, and the event will be the target object. And then we can come back to event, and here create a too-many relationship. One more thing you need to add right above the relationship is a backlink. This is important because that's what tells ObjectBox which to-one relationship to populate this new list to. Inside, I wrote event to explicitly specify which to-one relationship I wanted to take from, which is sometimes optional, but if you have more than one to-one relationship with event inside the task entity, you're going to have to specify which specific relationship you're trying to make using this too-many keyword. Now, the next thing we have to do is update our objectbox.dart file to include the event box. And for that, let's just come here and add a new box for the events, and as well as assign it inside the create method. As well as we don't really need to check if the task box is empty now because all tasks will be under the event. So we can replace that with event instead. And then under here, we could start creating a new event that is going to take all the owner and tasks and put them inside. We initialize it with a name, a date, we're just using the current date right now, and a location. And that will be enough to create our event. We don't really need to change much in the owners and tasks here, but we can set the relationship by using .add and putting in the tasks. We can put one task just like that and just put both tasks individually. Or another option would be to use add all and to put them in together as a list. Both work fine. I think the second one is simpler and easier. You don't have to keep track of many things. And another neat thing again is you also don't have to do a put on tasks anymore. You can just do a put on event, and it will handle creating the tasks and the owners for you. And you don't have to keep track of all these complex relationships as long as they're all related to event. It will automatically do a put if they're all related, and if they already existed, it will only create the relation. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add or update some of the methods that we already had. So you can go to add tasks and add event as one of the parameters. And then under the new tasks, we're going to create a relationship with the event. We're going to add a task to the event, and then we're going to add the event into the task as a target as well. After that, we can do a put on the event alone, and we no longer need the task box, and it will handle everything else for us. As well as, let's just update the debug print as well to also include the event if we need it in the future. Yep, you can take a look there. We're just going to add the event name into the print. We don't really need to change add owner, but we could also add an add event that takes in a name, a date, and a location. And then from that, we can go ahead and create an event, and we will put an event. That's pretty much it. And then we're going to add a debug print just to see if what we did worked or not. The next thing we're going to do is add another stream to get all the events. It's going to be very similar to the get tasks too. It's just going to query the event box for all the events and sort by date. Oh, one more thing is I did forgot to build run our build again after we've changed the model. So let's just quickly do that. And yep, we don't get that error anymore. So yes, it's going to be the similar query to the task box query that we did, but for events, and we're going to sort it by event date, and it's going to be ascending. After that, we're going to return this query, and yeah, it's going to be returned as a stream. The next thing I want to do is I want to update get tasks because we don't need to get tasks alone anymore. We're going to get tasks that are specific to an event, and we can easily do this using links, which are equivalent to the SQL version of joins. So we're going to change this to task event and accept an event ID as a parameter. We don't need to change a lot from what we'd already written, but let's just add a link in the middle, a link for tasks in which their events equals to the event ID that was just passed. This is just very neat. We don't really need to add any business logic in our side. You can just simply do a join, which is awesome. And then return the same stream that we were returning. Cool. And after that, let's start making some of our UI elements and start with an event card. Let's import our material design package and our Intel package. Oh, it doesn't seem like I put it in my dependencies on my pubspec.yaml file. So I can just go back here under the dependencies and I will put it there. And I need any version, it's okay. If we go back and do a flutter pub get, I think the error will be fixed. Perfect. Then we need to import the model and then we'll create our event card widget. And then we're going to add an event as one of the parameters when we call this class, and we'll put it in the constructor. And then in the return, we'll start building our container. And as a child to this container, we're going to have a column, and we're going to start putting the elements under this column. Before that, we can give the container some styling, like a margin, as well as some box decoration for the entire card. You can see it's just a color. We added a border radius and a box shadow property um, that has color, border radius, and offset. Under the column, we can start putting in the widget name. We wrapped it with a container with some alignment and padding. We've also given a text style. But let's wrap everything with expanded so that it fills as much space as possible. It takes advantage of all the space as possible. Below that, we'll have a container and we'll give it some alignment and padding. And then the child would be a row. Inside will be where we store the location as well as the date. We'll start off with a text widget that has the date and we'll give it some custom styling. After that, we are going to have a spacer to take as much space as possible between them. And then after that, we will have another text widget where we will be keeping the date. Here's where we are going to be using the intl package from earlier. So we'll format the date so that it gives the local date for every user that's using it and it stays consistent. And we also are going to add a style with font size, height, and an overflow. So similar to the task list view, we're going to create an event list view as well. So let's come and create a new file under components and let's name it event list view. And we'll import the material design package as well as the main.dart file model as well as the event card.dart files. And we'll have a new widget. We'll call it event list. Then we'll go down to the event list state widget and we're going to return a stream builder that takes in a list of events. The stream will be the get events stream we just made earlier. And in the builder, we're going to do something very similar to the task list view, where we're going to have a condition that checks if the snapshot is empty. And then if it is not, we're going to return a list view builder. And the item builder we will define soon. And if it's empty, then we're just going to return a text widget. Now let's define the item builder. For that, it's again going to be very similar to the task list, except it's going to be adapted for the events. What this function basically does is take a list of events and it will loop through them and for each of them return an event card. The next thing we're going to do is move the task list from inside the homepage into its own separate view because we don't need a dedicated view for all the tasks, but it has to be specific for every event. So let's just create a new file and call it task page. And we'll just import all the dependencies that we need, like the model, task add, and task list view, and we'll call it a task page widget. We'll have an event variable that's going to be specified when we call the task page, also added in your constructor. And after that, we're going to start building the page. So we'll have a scaffold and we'll give it a unique key again, so it updates when the parent updates, and we'll give it a unique app bar that's dynamic that depends on the event name. And for the body, we'll start off with a column and the child is going to be an expanded widget, and inside we're going to call the task list widget. And we're also going to pass in the event ID so that we know the list that's going to come is specific to the event. But we did a couple of changes from the earlier version that breaks our task add and also our task list views. So we're going to have to go ahead and fix those before we run this. So in the task list view, if we go to our stream, we've changed the get tasks in the ObjectBox file. So go ahead and change it into get tasks of event and also pass the specific event. Since we're not accepting it in the task view, we also have to add that variable inside task list. So we added an event ID integer and of course add it to the constructor as well. And then we will take that and put it inside get tasks of event. So now we can call it from the task page and it will render the specific task list that we are looking for. Um, After that, since the homepage is now going to be used to list all the events, we're also not going to be needing this specific floating action button, so we can just copy it and take it to the task page, which is going to be where we're going to list tasks from now on. So we'll just go down to the bottom of the scaffold and paste this floating action button, and make sure you don't forget your commas. That might be the reason you might be receiving an error if you do. So let's go back to the task add. I think it has an error as well. Yes, we changed the add task function so that it includes event as well. So we're just going to accept an event in the add task widget again. We're just adapting the entire app so that it considers events now. So again, add it to your constructor, and then after you're done, and the add tasks will put in the event that will be passed in when we call the add task widget. And in the task page, we will also add and then go to the task page where we call the add task, and we have to remove the const because it's no longer a constant. We're passing a variable inside, and specify that it's an event. And yes, that's pretty much it for the task page. Now we only have to go back to the main page and replace the task list we have in our body, since we're not going to use these here anymore, with the event list widget. That's going to be the home page from now on. We're still receiving an error. Oh, we did not import it yet. So if you made the same mistake that I did, you can just scroll back up and import the event list view. And I think it should be working. We could go ahead and add a const because we're not passing anything into the event list, and we can avoid the warning from the linter. Now we can just hot reload to see our changes. Oh, we have an error, so you have to kind of have to look at what we did wrong. It might be from the event card. Okay, think I see the problem. It's in the event name, and the widget where we have the event name. We put the expanded in the wrong place, so we can just remove this expanded widget. So what we're going to do here first is remove the expanded widget. So what's wrong is the entire widget is supposed to be wrapped with a row, and we didn't do that. So we're going to go ahead to the column right above the expanded that we just removed, and we're going to wrap that column with an expanded widget. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and wrap that expanded widget with a row. And after that, if we reload, we won't see those errors anymore. And we can also see that our card is rendered perfectly. And there you have it. That's the event card. It was a lot of fixing the breaking changes that we made earlier and making sure it accommodates events. Now we can actually go up here and add one more functionality to this card. We can add a gesture detector so that when we click the card, it takes us to the list of events. So to do that, we just come to the container, the top one, and then wrap that with a gesture detector. And then we have to define an onTap method that is called every time we click on the card. And that is going to navigate into a new route, which is going to be the task page on this case. And of course, don't forget to import the specific component that we want. Now, if you reload and click, it takes us to the list of tasks that are assigned to the specific event. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add functionality to create new events. So we're going to do a floating action button, same as the adding new tasks button. And we're just going to add a floating action button, and then we will start by defining an onPressed function that will only be called when we press the floating action button. And in that, what we're going to do is navigate into a new page, into a material page route, and that's going to be into a new component that we're going to create right now. We're going to call it add event. We're receiving the error because, again, we didn't make it yet, and also don't forget your semicolons. Yep, after that, let's just go back to the components file and start creating the add event widget. We can name it event add. And then let's start importing the material design, the Intel package, as well as the main.dart file. And we can call it add event as well. And then let's just go to return and add a simple text like adding events here, just so we can connect it to the main page and then make sure that it works. Check if it works. Of course, import it. I don't know why I keep forgetting these right now. After you've done that, I think it's going to work. Let's hit reload. There we go. We see the button. So the next thing we could do is add an icon for the button. Let's go below the onPress method and add a child of an icon. and we'll make it same icon as the task add, and we'll make it the add icon. We can check now if it's added, and there we go. We have, and when you click it, it takes us to a new page, and that says adding events here. The styling is very different, so we're going to have to work on this right now. And let's just go back to the event add page and add a new scaffold. We can also add an app bar. We'll call it event add, or add event. I think that sounds much better. And then we will give it a body of column, and we're going to start adding the inputs under the column. But before that, we can go ahead and define our text input controllers, which is where we're going to be storing the information that the user is going to be adding about the events. We did something similar to the task add. So we're going to have an event name controller, event location controller, and something to store the current date. We can have a method called a create event that checks whether all of these are not empty and makes sure that the user filled these properly. And then we're going to call the event add, or the add event method that we defined inside the ObjectBox.dart file. Then we're just going to pass both the event name, the location, as well as the current date that we will be collecting from this particular page. Once we're done with that, we can start to build the text fields. So if you just scroll down to the column we made a little bit earlier, and we can start putting the text fields inside the containers, just in case we want to customize them a little bit. Inside the text field, we can set the controller as event name controller, and we can also give it some decoration and a label of event name. And let's also give it some padding so that it's not going from the edge of the screen to the other edge. And there we go. I think it looks great. So as users write text there, it's going to be saved in the event name controller. And let's do the same thing again. We can just copy what we just made and paste it again and adapt it for the location. And of course, then go ahead and change the label text from event name to location, as well as the controller. And if we do a quick hot reload, you can see that both of our text fields are now rendered, and we can see both event name and location. So after that, let's go below that and add a row widget so that we can include the date input. And we can have a container inside. And for the container's child, we will be having a text field that will just tell us the current date. But for that, we have to make sure if it's null or not. If it's not null, we'll give the date that we have stored. But if it is null, we're just going to provide not selected as the text. If we do a hot reload there, we can see the text that we have. It's going to be not selected because it's null right now. So, but let's add a little padding both on the container, but also on the main row so that the entire row is not too close to the text field right above it. For the rows padding, we will give it a symmetric vertical padding of 8 pixels. Now, the next thing we need is a button that'll allow us to select the date. And for that, we can have a text button, and then inside we'll give it a text that'll say select date. And then we'll also give it its own styling. We'll start with just making it bold for now, and then we'll add anything more if it's needed. The next thing we're going to do after that is define an onPress method is that we're going to call when we press the button. Also, don't forget to make your text const if it's constant. And so for the method, we're going to have a date picker, and we'll give it the initial date, first date, and last date that it's going to be the span that will allow you to select from. And then once the user selects it, we can do a set state to change the current date inside the widget into the new date that the user selected. And it will also update the UI. So if we do a hot reload, we can see the new button is here. Yeah, I figured it'll change the color automatically. That's why I didn't add any more color in the styling. What we could do now is add a spacer in between the two widgets so we can make the select date go to the other side of the page. I think it looks better, and it's also consistent with our design so far. Let's just do a quick hot reload now, and yep. Okay, I think it needs a little more padding as well. So we could add similar padding as the other one inside the text button, and we'll give it the symmetric horizontal padding of 20. Perfect. I think that looks great. Now we have everything we need to store the information we gather from the user. The next thing we have to do is have a save button. And for that, let's find the appropriate widget. It's going to be the first column, and inside of that, add a row. That's because I want it to go right under select date. So we're going to have a row with a spacer, and then right next to it, it's going to be the save button. And I want to make it a different kind of button now. Instead of a text button, let's have an elevated button. And then for the onPressed method, we will call our create event function, and then we will navigator.pop to leave this page after we're done. And for the child, we'll have the save text.
And okay, it definitely needs some more padding, so we're gonna wrap the row with some padding and we will set it to a symmetric horizontal padding of 20 pixels. Perfect. I think that looks great. Now let's just quickly test this out. We can give it an event name of One Direction Concert. I used to be a big fan of the one they work together. But yeah, let's give it One Direction Concert. And for the location, we can just set it to Berlin, Germany, because I'm in Germany, but not in Berlin. And then we can just select a random date. Doesn't really matter. Then we'll go ahead and hit OK. And if we save that, there we go. We have our new event right under the Met Gala event. We have a lot of cool events we are organizing right now. And as you can see, we can click in to find our tasks within the event as well. Well, now we're basically done with our one-to-many extension of this application. Now we have fully implemented the event entity and also created the to-many relationship or the one-to-many relationship from the event in the direction of tasks. So you can click the event and see all the tasks related to it. And to achieve that, we managed to do it very easily within ObjectBox inside the model file. You can see how we only needed the to-many keyword and assign it to tasks, and also have the backlink if it's a one-to-many relationship. And that refers to the to-one relationship inside the task that we also defined. So it's pretty simple to do. So the last thing we're going to cover is many-to-many relationships. In the context of this application, as you can see so far, only one owner could work on one task at a time. But there are a lot of cases where we might want multiple people to collaborate. And to achieve this, the perfect way we could try this is to create a many-to-many relationship between a task and an owner. And we can get started with that right now. The first thing we're going to do is go to our owner object inside the task entity and change that to to-many. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead to the owner entity and add a task object and then create a to-many relationship here as well to the task entity. And one final thing is to add the backlink annotation right above the new tasks object to make sure that we can access the to-many relationship in the reverse direction, making it fully many-to-many. Now that we've drastically changed the model file, that's definitely going to break the application. So we're going to have to go back and fix and also adapt the application to our new model. So let's go back to the objectbox.dart file and start from here. Starting off, the target is not going to work anymore because since we changed it to to-many, it's going to be a list-based model. So we're going to replace that with add, and we're going to add owner 2, and we're going to do the same thing to owner 1 as well. So the way to add multiple owners into one task is also much simpler. So here instead of add, we'll change it to add all and put in a list of the owners we want. And also change the name of the task from someone's task to a shared task so it's easier to see later on. And it's as easy as that. And let's change all the other targets as well into the list-based add. And also for the owner print, it also used target, but now target does not work because owners is a list as opposed to only one target. So to print all the members of the owner list, we're going to have to change this into a map that's going to loop through the owners list and then send them back, preferably as a string that is separated by a comma. And to do that, we just use the join keyword, and inside we're going to pass the comma. And that'll be it for the debug print. Now let's look at the other places that also have errors. And the first thing I noticed is that the objectbox.g.dart file that we generated is no longer valid because we changed the model drastically. So we have to run build runner build again to generate a new one, I guess a more updated one for the new model. And that pretty much covered that error. And then let's go back to the task card. Here it's a little different because instead of one owner, we're showing multiple owners. So the dot target way we used here does not work anymore as well. So we have to accommodate for the list. First thing we'll do here is remove the get from the database and replace that with an empty list. Then we're going to change the data type for current owner into a string, and maybe we can rename it to assigned owners as well. That'll keep the list of assigned owners as a list. Then let's go ahead to the init state and remove the assignment of current owner and change that to an assignment for assigned owners. And we can add the owners passed into our owners list, and then we'll map through that owners and join it into a string like we did for the debug print earlier. After that, we can just scroll down to see if there was any errors. Yes, here in the assigned to, instead of assigning one owner, we'll just paste in assigned owners, and that'll take care of the rest.
And that's pretty much it for the task page. Generally, when you make data model changes, you need to give ObjectBox a little more information to help it understand or work with the ambiguity. And for that, I have linked the documentation below to the specific chapter titled Updating Data Models. But for now, this is a little bit of an unusual build because this is not how I would normally build an application. I am showing you the changes in the model file step by step so that we better understand how relationships work and how we can make a one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship, and many-to-many relationship. So in my case, since I don't really need to retain the data, and since everything I need is in the demo data anyways, I'm just going to uninstall this application and reinstall it again. And you can follow along just like that for this tutorial. Where if you're working on a project where what you've already done is important and you want to maintain it, and you want to maintain some sort of consistency throughout the changes, I highly recommend you check out the Updating Data Models chapter and the documentation that, again, I will link in the description below. Now that we have our app up and running, you can see that we can save multiple owners under one task, and it displays that feature well. The next thing we're going to do is include the feature of adding multiple owners into a task. So for that, we're going to go to the task add file. And the first thing I want to do is go ahead to the save widget, and we're just going to copy the entire row that's wrapped by the padding, and we're going to copy and paste it right over there. So now we have two rows with the save button instead of one. It's going to make sense. We're going to replace the top one in a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead to the add owner widget, and we're going to cut that out of the row. So take that whole chunk of code. I'm doing this because I want to fill the entire row with the assign owner toggle, because it's going to be a little different than we did it earlier. So take the entire piece of code of the add owner and replace it with the save button widget that you copied. It's makes sense for me this way because it's easier to see where the widget is, because it tends to get confusing sometimes in Flutter. And after that, just format your code in case it got a little messy. And of course, if you didn't copy the spacer widget, just add that as well so that the add owner goes to the other side. Yep, and as you can see, if you do a hot reload, the add owner goes to the other side. And now we have a little more space to work with the owner toggle. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead to the drop-down menu that we made and remove that widget entirely, because we're going to create an entirely different toggle. In the place of the drop-down menu, we're going to have our own card widget. And as a child to that, we're going to create our own custom widget. We can name it owner display for now, and we'll define it soon. And we can wrap that card with an expand widget again, so it takes all the remaining space. So it's easier to see the owners if we select multiple, and does it overflow into the screen or the small space that it had previously. Now let's go ahead outside of the scaffold so we can define our owner display widget. To do that, we can start writing our widget. It's going to be a widget. We're going to call it owner display. And in the parameter, we're going to add context. Then we're going to define a function inside that widget. We're going to call it onTap, and it's going to have a return value of dynamic because it might return an array or list or null. And then we're going to navigate into a new page called owner list, which will house all the owners, and then we'll do the selection in that page. And then we'll return the list that will be put inside selected owners here. Then we're going to go check if selected owners is empty. And if it is, we're going to return nothing. And then if it's not, we're going to change set state and change current owner into the selected owner. And then also return selected owners. And then on the main function outside of the onTap, we're going to return the current owner, but we're going to check if it's empty first. But I don't know why there's an error. So wait, we can go back up and check. I think we defined current owner. We haven't defined it yet. So we don't need the owners list yet first, and then we can change the current owner into a list of owners, because now it's many to many and we might have multiple owners. And we're going to change how we assigned it in the init state as well. And then let's go ahead inside the create owner function, and we should also change the set state. Instead of target, we can now add, or we must now add, and we also don't need line 32 anymore. And we also are not going to be needing the new owner list on line 28 as well. Inside the set state, we're actually not adding new owner into the previous list. We're reassigning it. So make sure to change it to an assignment. That was a small mistake on my part. For some reason, our function in ObjectBox.dart is giving us an error. So I think we're going to have to go back there and check if we've made any mistakes or if there's something that we have forgot to update. So let's just quickly go back there and see what might be wrong. Okay, so as you can see, in the parameters, when we passed owner, we passed the singular owner, but right now we might also be working with a list of owners. So we just have to update that. So instead of owner, just make it a list of owners and also update it on the line where we are adding the owner into the new task that we created. Okay, now that we've dealt with all those little bugs, we can go back into building our owner display widget. So we were returning the current owner, but first we're checking if it's empty. So we're going to check if it's empty, and if it is empty, we're going to return a list tile that we are going to define ourselves, and it'll just have the title of no owner and also pass the onTap method that we just created. And then if it's not empty, it will display the current owners. It will map through them and show them as a string, and then also again provide the onTap method so that every time people click that toggle or the tile, it'll take them to the owners list and they can select new owners. So let's just define the build list tile quickly here. It will have a similar structure to the owner display, but here we're going to have to pass a string called title. So that's what we're going to use to show the list of owners that are already selected or if they're not. And also, again, the callback function on tap. And then we're going to simply return a list tile widget that's going to have the onTap method, and we're going to set that to the onTap that we passed. And then the title is going to be the title that we passed. So we're just going to put it inside a text widget and pass title. After that, we're going to give it some styling. We're going to add a few things such as max lines, so it can't be more than one line. And so we'll add an overflow as well, and also just give it some colors as well as a font size. After that, we're going to add an icon just to show people what it does or make sure they understand that it's a button they have to click. And for that, we're just going to have an arrow drop down button and also give it some color and font size. Next thing we have to do is define the owner list before we can hit reload so we don't get an error. So for that, let's just again start importing the material design as well as the main and model.dart files. After that, we're going to have our own widget. We're going to call it owner list. So inside the owner list state, we can start first defining the owners, and we're going to get all the owners in the owner box. And then let's have another list that keeps the selected owners. And then inside the widget, we can define our scaffold. Then we can start by defining our app bar with an app bar widget. And for the title, we can pass a text widget. And then for the title, the text, we can have it as select owners. So now we can just quickly do a hot reload so that we can see our changes. We can go back to task add, and I think we haven't imported owner list yet. So we can just quickly do an import. Again, this is really easy if you're doing it VS Code, but you have to do it manually if you're using any other IDE. So now let's try it out. We're going to go to the add task page. We can see our new toggle, and then when you click it, it takes us to a new page. Cool. I think everything's working great so far. The next thing we're going to do is go down and define a stateless widget. I think it's going to be our first stateless widget we're using, and we're going to call it owner tile. And inside, we're going to have a few things we're going to keep track of, like the owner, a boolean that's going to display whether it's selected or not, and also a value changed callback function that's going to notify us when the value changes, and we're going to call that unselected owner. Then for the build, we're just going to keep our color in a variable as well as the style because it changes depending on whether something is selected or not. So we're just going to keep that outside of the widget and keep it in a style variable. Then we're going to return a list tile, and then for an onTap method, we're going to return unselected owner and we're going to pass owner. And then for the title, we'll just have the owner name and we'll pass this tile in. And then as a trailing, if it's selected, we're going to pass an icon, a check icon. And then if it's not selected, we're not going to pass any icon. So it's not going to have a trailing if it's not selected. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to our owner list widget and start building the UI. So we're going to start building our body. For that, we're going to have a column. And then we are going to define an expanded widget so that, again, it takes up as much space as possible, all the rows possible. And then inside we'll have a list view. And for its children, we're going to map through all the owners that we have. Then we're going to loop through all the owners and put them in a list. And as we loop through, we're going to return an owner tile for all of the owners. Of course, for the widget, we're going to have to pass the specific owner. And then we're also going to need an isSelected variable that's going to check if it's selected, if it's already selected. So just so that we don't select it twice, and it toggles between selected and not selected. The thing we have to do is define the select owner method. So let's go out of the widget and start defining this function. It's not going to return anything, but it's going to take an owner, and then it's going to check if it's already selected. Then inside of a set state, if it's already selected, it's going to remove it from selected owners. And if it's not selected, it's going to add it to selected owners. One more thing we have to implement is the done button, so that after we're done selecting the owners, we can finish up and go back to the previous page and send the current selected owners. For the done button, we're going to start off with a label that's going to display all the owners, or the number of owners that we've selected so far. It's going to return an elevated button. Then we'll define an onPressed function. When it's pressed, we're just going to pop out from this current view. And as a child text, we're going to pass in the label, and then we're going to give it some styling of our own. I use the Prettier extension to format my code once in a while, because Flutter Go sometimes tends to be hard to read unless you format it. Now, if we reload, we can see our list of owners, and we can also select them. The button seems to be missing. Oh, of course, we didn't go and add it to the owner list. So let's go ahead and add it right there, right below the map. And then if we reload again, we can see the button. It's going to need a little more padding, so let's just give it some more padding. I'll make it 50. Yeah, I think that looks great. So now we can go ahead and select our owners, and then it'll go back to the previous page, and you can see the list. So now we can create a new task. Let's just name it Aaron and Annie, and there we go. Now we can assign multiple people to multiple tasks using the add task button that we already created. And with that, we have completed our full application. We have managed to build an event management application that maps one-to-one relationships, one-to-many relationships, as well as many-to-many relationships. And we built a complete application using Flutter and ObjectBox. Now I'll give the chance to you to further improve this application. You could add new features such as the ability to edit the task, or a way to keep track of who has done what tasks or what they've completed so far. The sky's the limit. Once you're done, and if you do choose to improve this application, you could put it up on GitHub and then tag us at ObjectBox_IO on Twitter, and we will check it out and maybe even share your project.